Centers in the NHL are a tight commodity right now, and with Nazem Kadri likely to be moved before the trade deadline, the Flames may have to rely on the Wranglers roster to find the answer at that position.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Locked On Flames, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. We center today on the center position and look at what is available at the Calgary Wranglers level on the roster listed as centers. We examine the inventory that Calgary may have to pull from if Nazem Kadri is in fact moved at the trade deadline. Speaking of which, right now it's a trade freeze with the Olympics having started in Italy. So we'll take a look at teams that should make a move as soon as things unfreeze. But before the trade deadline, The Athletic had a piece about that. And then the official opponent jersey power rankings, as we do every single Monday. We look at the games that were against the Calgary Flames and rate the aesthetics of the opponent's jerseys and vote for those on YouTube. My name is Ryan G. I'm a lifelong play-by-play broadcaster in the Pacific Northwest and a Flames watcher of 40-plus games for at least a few decades, ever since Peter Marr was the soundtrack to my 2004 Tampa Bay Calgary Stanley Cup final. Calgary Wranglers, it's a 5-game losing streak right now for the AHL team of the Calgary Flames. They play at Manitoba on Saturday and on Monday, but as we get into this show on this Monday edition of Locked On Flames, want to examine what Calgary has available with just a couple of anecdotes about each of the roster listed centers available that the Wranglers have, because if Nazem Kadri leaves the team and Calgary doesn't get somebody in return that's likely to start playing, unlike what happened with Calgary's deal for Rasmus Andersson, he goes to Vegas, you get Zach Whitecloud and kind of plug and play, if you will. What if that's not the case? If Kadri leaves, who's available in the roster for the Wranglers or on the roster for the Wranglers? And that starts with Carter Wilkie. 19 games so far for the Wranglers, just 2 goals and 1 assist. All of that has happened the year prior, so nothing for the 2025-26 season, but undrafted and was a member of the Rapid City Rush, recalled to the AHL in November after he was sent to Rapid City after the Wranglers camp earlier this year. 1 year played at North Dakota, 3 seasons at RIT, hoisting a championship. And that's one opportunity that Calgary has at the AHL level. But one of the things I wanted to center in, no pun intended, around this conversation is who's going to score, right? Calgary has had their points leader be Kadri almost the entire season and certainly sits 6 points ahead of anybody else on the Flames roster. And when you look at Wilkie, certainly one of the youngest and least experienced AHL centers on the roster for the Wranglers and someone who hasn't had a ton of scoring go his way. Then you turn your attention to someone like David Cilia, who's now in the 3rd season at the AHL level, just shy of 100 games so far and has scored 6 goals. Alternate captain when he played for Wisconsin. He was formerly a Minnesota State collegiate hockey player and had the choice to go for a 5th year with Wisconsin, but instead decided to go with the Wranglers instead, and was part of that Badgers PK unit that ranked 3rd in the country that season. And somebody who is well known in Calgary because of the name. His father, Jim, was part of a Grey Cup championship Calgary Stampeders team and later went into politics. But yeah, you have a guy who, at least if nothing else, is good at winning faceoffs. That was kind of his calling card at the collegiate level when he was one of the best in the NCAA, getting nearly 60% of those draws. Then Carter King is someone else you can look at from the AHL level, but much like Wilkie, doesn't score a ton. You have a little bit better points per clip when you look at the number of games played, 8 points over 43 games, splitting evenly between goals and assists, compared to Cilia, who's at 93 games with just 19 points so far in his AHL career. You have someone who's also from Calgary and Carter King and had that professional contract signed after he finished with career highs in goals and assists. 43 points at the time, was one of the 19 NCAA players to score at least 20 goals in a season. Also had won a national title with Denver, and told to the Denver Post in juniors, he considered himself one of the, least appealing forwards on his team. Said something to the effect of 14th forward in a room of 15. And now you have a guy who has national championship experience and also seems to be pretty good at winning the puck on the dot. Talked about NCAA success with Cilia. You have National Collegiate Hockey Conference success with King, where he won 54% of his draws. Those are three of the faces that we may be less familiar with. One of the faces that Calgary has available in its AHL roster is one we're very familiar with. We're talking about Costco, over 400 AHL games total, 17 with the Wranglers, though, has 9 points in those 17 games with Calgary, and came into the season expecting to have more promise. He's definitely had a lot of adversity with a vehicle crash and then a torn ACL. Finally gets his first one-way deal, and 120 games with Stockton, so been part of the organization for a while. And I'm not anticipating Kirkland necessarily staying with Calgary after this contract is up. That's just a guess. It's certainly not based on anything that seems to be the chatter out there per se, but already sent back down recently to the AHL group. Didn't play in Calgary's last game against Edmonton, and so I think you have a guy in Kirkland that if he was going to have taken off to the point where Calgary would have wanted him to take off at this stage of his career, where he has played 20 games at the NHL level this year, likely would have happened already. And over the course of his 50 NHL games, he's put up 10 points so far with the Calgary Flames. We'll see. It could be different, but right now it kind of feels like Justin might be in his final season with Calgary, and not somebody that you'd look to in terms of youth movement future with the Calgary Flames. You have Clark Bishop also on this roster for the Wranglers. You have 478 NHL games also, so quite a bit of experience for Bishop. I had time with the Flames prior, and this is the fourth season that he's been playing with the Wranglers, but 40-plus goals in those 4 seasons, has captain experience wearing the C for the Wranglers, and had a career season with 19 goals, 19 assists in 38 games over 66 games played. So, had that debut with Calgary earlier, but that was on, the heels of finally getting to the NHL, back in February of 2022. So he had played his first game with Calgary after not having been in the lineup for a few seasons. Another championship, caliber type player, having won a Calder Cup back with Charlotte. And so we'll see what happens with someone like Bishop. I think I always lean toward folks who have leadership capability, somebody who's going to be good for the organization for a while. Anytime that you can get the C on your sweater is always a little bit of a feather in that kind of cap. And so could be potential somebody that the Flames are excited about at that position. You have Sam Morton now, 126 games with the Wranglers this season, 43 games played and combined 17 points. So you're starting to see a little bit more production at 11 goals and 16 assists. Called up earlier this year, too, after going for 12 points over a 16-game stretch. Former finalist for the Hubie Baker Memorial Award as college's top hockey player, and then Collegiate Hockey Association's Player of the Year win with Minnesota State. A guy that just finds ways to win. College free agent, so somebody who comes into the organization, you're looking for upside, looking for potential, and seems to be someone who's kind of finishing with that, not just potential, but maximizing some of that potential for the Calgary Wranglers. Rory Cairns, last one on this list. How about 14 goals, 23 assists? You're looking at 37 points across 44 games. And this is someone also where you invest a little bit of draft capital going in the 6th round back in 2020, and then 2 assists in his first ever game against Chicago back in 24-25, had a 5-game stint with the Flames and ended up having 4 points over that stretch. But I still love this bio piece as a former athletic communications guy, somebody who worked writing bios and filling information on websites. The claim to fame being 118 points in 67 games over his final year of juniors. I thought that one was kind of eye-opening. And somebody who has success at one level to that degree can oftentimes have success at a different level. So we'll see if it translates for Calgary and some of what's available at the center position for the Calgary Flames out of the Wranglers roster. Let me know in the YouTube comments and by reaching out to us, who do you think is the Wranglers center, roster listed center that you would most like to see be part of this future for the Calgary Flames in the next 18 to 24 months? Let us know, and we'd love to hear from you. Speaking of trades and the future, the trade freeze is on right now with the Winter Olympics. Calgary will be probably one of the most active teams out of that bottom five when we turn our clock over to the trade freeze ending and the trade deadline looming. We'll talk about that next when this edition of Locked On Flames continues. Cold days, packed schedules, and big goals. That's winter. And when there's not a lot of time to cook, eating well can feel like another thing on the to-do list. That's where Factor comes in. Factor makes healthy eating easy with fully prepared meals designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs so you can eat well without the planning, prepping, or cooking. They're fresh, they're never frozen, and Factor meals are ready in about 2 minutes. The ingredients really stand out too. You get lean proteins, colorful veggies, whole foods, and tons of variety. There's 100 rotating meals each week, options for high protein, Mediterranean diet, even GLP-1 support, Calorie Smart, and even the new Muscle Pro collection for strength and recovery. Head to factormeals.com/lockedonnhl50off and use code LOCKEDONNHL50off to get 50% off and free breakfast for a year. Eat like a pro this month with Factor. New subscribers only, varies by plan. One free breakfast item per box for 1 year while the subscription is active. Thank you so much for making Locked On Flames your first listen. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Of course, you have access to everybody across the entire Locked On Podcast Network when you hang out with us in the Everydayer Club Discord server. I have everything registered, ready to go, start interacting with you more as the NHL schedule resumes post-Olympics. I want to see you in there, maybe some watch-alongs with some of the Flames games in March and April. Excited to see how Calgary finishes out the season, and that is just part of the perk that you can have by joining the Everydayer Club. Of course, ad-free access to Locked On Flames on your favorite podcast app, but go check it out. The Everydayer Club, it is built for you if you never miss a show. That's lockedonflames.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. The Athletics, Harman, Dayal had some moves as soon as trades are allowed again in the Olympics. Now, there's a disclaimer that Harman put in the article saying, I'm not privy to the exact trade conversations in league-wide market for these 5 players, specifically talking about some of the St. Louis Blues that we'll get into in a moment. But these were some options looking at teams that have to make a move at the NHL trade deadline. And 2 of them are bottom feeding type teams like where Calgary is at and where St. Louis is as well. The Blues 31st place, and they, of the 4 bottom teams, looking at Calgary, the New York Rangers, and the Vancouver Canucks, are the only team that has not made a move. And so the one thing that was noticed in the Athletic article was how St. Louis is coming at this as a team that has all 5 of their best potential trade pieces not being considered rentals because they have time remaining on their contracts. And Justin Faulk was one that really stood out in this list. You have someone who was traded back in 2020 for a 5th-round pick and in exchange for a couple of players in a 2021 7th-round pick. And they locked Faulk up to a 7-year, $45 million contract. And so there was some discussion to the Montreal Gazette from contributor Jack Todd in the conversation about Faulk, and said the following season that Faulk had went back to the Blues during Game 2 against Colorado. Nazem Kadri, all tied in, ended up getting Faulk with a headshot and was suspended for 8 games. And this kind of goes into why, and according to Todd, he's not keen on the idea of the Canadians bringing in Nazem Kadri as a trade deadline piece. But this talks about kind of the history of Nazem being suspended, including this hit that he put on Faulk back in that Avalanche Blues series during the postseason. And so the Blues end up getting eliminated from the 2021 Stanley Cup playoffs. And Kadri hasn't been suspended since 2021, but had a history of suspensions up to that point. So interesting that one of the trade pieces focused in on this Athletic story about the Blues possibly making a deal before the end of the trade deadline for this current season is tied into a Flames exact same situation where they might have Kadri on the move to a Stanley Cup contender. And there's a little bit more perspective too on Faulk specifically as we turn over to Locked On Blues, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Is it time to move on from Justin Faulk? Is it time to move on from Braden Shen? Is it time to move on from Robert Thomas, Colton Parayko, Jordan Kyrou? Well, that's been a question that has been running nonstop in my head. Who is it that we're going to be saying goodbye to? Because it's inevitable. We're going to be saying goodbye to somebody prior to that trade deadline or on the day of the trade deadline, which is March 6th. I have a feeling that it's going to 100% be Justin Faulk, but it also could be Binnington or Kyrou. I don't think it's going to be Thomas. I don't think it's going to be Parayko. I've been thinking about it. They both have no trade clauses. I believe that Binnington actually has like a limited trade clause with half the teams in the league. But the reason why I say this is it's all about value. It's what you can get back from somebody. And I feel like both of those players have so much that other teams want.
So that's Locked On Blues with that perspective into the potential trade of Justin Faulk, again, from the perspective of the teams right now at the bottom of the standings, the bottom four, the St. Louis Blues being the only team that has not made a deal. Of course, you can find more about Locked On Blues through the Locked On Podcast Network. Calgary was listed in this Athletic article about the teams that need to make a move, and that's certainly not a surprise to me, likely not a surprise to you either. Already Calgary, and this is a quote that I want to share with you that stood out. Calgary has accumulated excess draft picks and some intriguing young players, but there's still a lot of work to be done to execute a successful rebuild. And Nazem Kadri certainly is the piece that stands out to the author, talking about finding a return similar to what they did with Elias Lindholm earlier. First round pick that they got back from the Canucks, B-grade prospect in Hunter Brustevich, who I think is kind of living up to what Flames fans expected. Definitely logged a lot of minutes in that Hanley pairing and has been somebody who's definitely contributing to Calgary on the blue line. And Calgary got a prospect back in that deal as well. The first rounder ended up becoming Matvei Gridin, who has likely been the standout this year for Calgary among that young player base. And then also examine the Brock Nelson deal with the Islanders last year. Nelson ended up getting dealt for a first-round pick, high-end prospect Callum Ritchie, and a conditional third-round pick too. And the difference too was Lindholm and Nelson were both rentals. You had no long-term deal existing. Now, is Kadri also valuable beyond that because of his contract? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, he's going to be going into his late 30s on the current deal that he's in, but I think the playoff experience and his production aren't going to get any better with Calgary. But after the trade freeze is over, the trade deadline comes up. So you might as well deal him at that point. And even talking to fellow Flames-focused content creators last week with Red Mile Rundown and the Armchair GM podcast, it seems like by and large, Kadri is the one that most people are focusing in on. The other teams that were mentioned in this article, Toronto Maple Leafs, Edmonton Oilers, Dallas Stars, and the Minnesota Wild. If you want to look more into what was said about those teams, I linked the article from The Athletic in the show notes, and you can check those out. That was, again, The Athletic's Harman Dayal talking about teams that should make a move before the NHL trade deadline and should be doing it as soon as the trade freeze, where we're currently at with the Olympics going on, ends. The official opponent jersey power rankings. It is a segment of ours every single Monday, and Calgary had 2 games last week that we are yet to rank the aesthetics of the opponents that were on the ice at Scotiabank Saddledome. We'll do that next when this episode of Locked On Flames continues. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your posts right at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. And according to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Coming up on Tuesday's edition of Locked On Flames, we take a look at where Calgary should go with some of the potential trades that are up in discussion. We'll also continue to examine some of the depth for this Calgary team, given the amount of draft picks and young players that they have. We'll also go around the division as we do on every Tuesday show and see what information you need to know about the other Pacific Division teams and their 2025-26 seasons. Thanks for being with us, as I mentioned, and it's time to get into the official opponent jersey power rankings. As we do this every single Monday, we look at some of the aesthetics that the other teams put on the ice against Calgary in their last games. And over the course of the Olympic break, we'll also be taking a look at some of the Olympic looks that are out there and kind of make sure I give you a full summary of the first part of this segment, because I know I've been giving out letter grades, but I haven't necessarily given you a running total, and I want to make sure to be able to do that. Calgary's only loss in those 2 matchups last week, the Toronto Maple Leafs came into Scotiabank Saddledome, beat Calgary, and this is a solid traditional look. The Maple Leafs, polarizing team. Maple Leafs fans love them. A lot of Maple Leaf haters that are out there. But this jersey is still just a quality look, and there's something about the simplicity of the shade of blue that Toronto has on their uniforms and how good it looks with nothing else but that dark blue on the white canvas. There's not accent marks. There's not a third color that's incorporated. This is just a clean, nice design. I also think, as far as the look of some of the old logos go, Toronto Maple Leafs is pretty good. It reminds me a little bit of, in the collegiate athletics world, there was a stretch of time that a lot of folks who hone in on aesthetics will describe the era of college mascots being some sort of animal with one of the like sailor style caps. Think Daffy Duck, right? No, not Daffy Duck, Donald Duck, the way that they have that little side cap on. There's one in Oregon that's well known for Division III athletics, the Linfield Wildcats. They have a Wildcat with kind of like a 1950s feel on it, 1930s, 1940s, and it has a little side cap that has an L on it. Toronto Maple Leafs, their logo is just reminiscent of kind of that era. It's very clean. There's not too much on it. The back numbers are solid and traditional. And so I think I like it better than their home uniforms. Certainly, it was worn on the road, and in Calgary, this one gets an A- from me. It's a really clean looking uniform. You know, Calgary's home sweaters. My wife and I were talking about this watching the game against the Edmonton Oilers last week. Calgary's uniforms look classic, but they're not as minimalist as this Toronto Maple Leafs uniform is. And I think Calgary has one of the best logos in all of professional sports. It definitely is better than Toronto's in my mind, because you translate all the information you need to know about the Flames in the C logo with the trailing flames. Toronto's is more spelled out. You need more information to convey the same kind of thing. It could easily just say Toronto and probably get as much across, but it's also unique, and I like that part about it. So credit to the Maple Leafs. They get an A- from me. The Edmonton Oilers were the other team. We've seen them already on Calgary's home ice. This was the fourth meeting. Keep in mind, Calgary wins the Battle of Alberta this year with 3 wins to 1 loss against a team that's likely headed back to the playoffs and possibly back in the Stanley Cup final for a third straight year. I've ranked these already. This is a C+, and nothing changed my mind. The only thing that I don't like is I still do not vibe with the Oilers logo. It's obviously spelled out, and the drip icon is cool and such, but it's just not something that appeals to me. It's got, I get what they're doing with the ground and all the things that bring the oil up and all that stuff, but it's just not my vibe. Orange and blue looks good. I think the balance of the cuffs and down to the lines around the lower torso match up, and I appreciate that. The shoulders, there's a little bit too much going on the shoulders with that extra orange stripe down at the base of the blue. So it's not a bad jersey. It's not a good jersey. And the Oilers logo, I think, keeps it from moving it back into the Bs for me. It's still a quality look, and orange and blue is a good color combination, certainly. But I rated it a C+. They played again on Calgary's ice, I think, for the second time. Quick math, in 5 weeks, going between late December and early February. So nothing's changed in my mind, and I certainly would invite you to leave us a comment and let me know which jersey you like the best out of those two. What's the best look that you've seen against Calgary in the first 50-plus games of the NHL season? Certainly would appreciate your feedback. Thanks for tuning in, as always, to Locked On Flames. Again, we'll keep diving into moves that Calgary has to make going back into trade, a timetable of trades where you're eligible to deal, folks, as right now it is the Olympics and we are in the middle of the trade freeze. Also, please make sure you subscribe and follow. We're trying to get to 700 subscribers on YouTube, and we're approaching being just a few tens or so away. 30, I think, is when I last looked. So certainly help us achieve that, especially if we can get to 700 by the end of the Olympic break. That would be amazing. And again, if you haven't already, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, please rate and review the show with 5 stars. If you find this your favorite show that you can tune into, we want to help spread information as well. If you never miss an episode, of course, the Everydayer Club is there for you. Get Locked On Flames ad-free, plus members-only Discord server access. Head to lockedonflames.supercast.com. And for those of you on video, we send you over to the first ever Locked On Podcast Network national YouTube channel. And for those on audio, make your second listen NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL. My name is Ryan G. Thanks for having fun with us. We'll talk to you again on Tuesday for more Locked On Flames.